What's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. New video. Today I want to talk about some CDC treachery. I may have told this story before. I know I've talked about this prison. I don't know if I got all the way into the details of it though. And so today we're going to take a little glimpse into how dirty the CDC can play and how egos can get in the mix and how things could potentially get very ugly very fast. So I was getting out of the SHU in 1997, Pelican Bay. When I went to committee, they put me up for transfer to Tehachapi in 1997. Tehachapi had been a 50-50 yard. They would send good dudes there. They would catch cases. Some would get killed by the cops. That happened a lot. But it wasn't a place to park it. And one of my older homeboys actually had gone down there and killed somebody in the middle of the yard. And so I remember going to the law library after committee. And this was 97. So this was back when they would fill up the law library, right? And one of the legends was across from me. And I remember telling him, yeah, man, these fools are trying to set me up. And he's like, who's trying to set you up? He thought I was talking about some political stuff. And I told him, nah, the Judas. He said, how are they trying to set you up? I said, they're sending me to Tehachapi. And I remember the sparkle he got in his eye and he rubbed his hands. And he's like, hey, you know your homeboy so-and-so who was right there with us, the same building, C4. He said, you know your homeboy went down there and you know what he did, right? I said, yeah. I said, I'll be right back. He said, okay, I'll be looking to see you soon. Something along those lines, right? And so they kicked me out of the SHU to B facility right there in Pelican Bay, right? And I waited for like 4 months. And there was, I think, 6 of us from B facility. And I think 3 from A facility. We all got on the same bus together. I remember prior to leaving, talking to one of the homies, and we were in the fish tank together. We were on Fish Road together, coming out of the SHU, waiting to get cleared to go to the yard. And it just so happened that he and I were both going to be on the same chain. I told this story before, and he was like, oh, you're going too? I said, yeah. He said, hey, well, check this out. We'll do a highlight together. I said, that's fine. I'm going to get off no matter what. You know what I mean? We'll get there. And he's like, okay, this is what we'll do. He says, we'll kick it. We'll get a good understanding of who's there and what's there and, whatever, right? And he goes, we'll get a couple visits. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, we'll get a couple visits, get some dope, that way. I said, no. I said, look, Holmes, with all due respect, if that's your plan, I'll see you later. I said, because I figure it won't take me more than 2, maybe 3 yards to figure out who my target is. I already have a strap and handle my business. And he's like, no, but we got to get some. I said, no, Holmes, no. I said, that's your thing. I'm going to do it my way. I said, I'm not trying to hang out and give these guys more and more of them dudes an opportunity to learn my name and make up a fucking story about me, And I didn't know until later, a few months later, that individual, my own Sally, was butthurt. And I became his enemy in his mind because he wanted to hang out on the yard. And I wanted to go down there and just put it down. It's the way some people are, right? So there's an older homie. I've mentioned him a bunch of times. He's one of the people that one of the original 12 that started in Monteflores, originally called Las Flores. He had Las Flores big across his back. And another one of my older homeboys was right there on BR with me, and they had him, my homeboy, and that dude from Flores had been doing time together since the 70s. And the one from Flores was going with us. And my homeboy said, hey, that's who you're gonna want to sell up with, eh? Like, I know the dude personally, and he's done a lot. So I approached him one day and I said, hey, Holmes, hey, you're catching that chain too, right? And he was like, yeah. And I told him, look, Holmes, everybody else going with us is my age, Holmes, and their mentality is different. Like I'm really trying to catch a body, eh? And he's like, so am I. And I told him, you want to sell up? And he said, yeah, let's do that. So he and I were on the same wavelength. You know, we're not going to go down there and hang out and try to get visits and all this, you know. We catch the chain. And on the chain, there was two individuals that we knew had an issue coming. But they weren't high value targets. These are just regular dudes. And actually one of them, I'm in the mindset right now because of all the hate going on. I kind of want to tell his story. But we knew, every one of us on the bus that knew who he was and what the story was and what the truth was, every single one of us said he's a target, but he's very, very, very much on the bottom. And so we get there. And we're in the fish roll. It was the weirdest thing ever. I'm not going to get into all that stuff, but just say this. For every bus that came, they filled it up with the junk that's on that yard and sent them the same day to Calipatria, D facility, right? It was weird. And every week, a bus came from High Desert, New Folsom, St. Ines Valley, from all the 180s, right? Every week. And every week, a bus of trash left, right? And you know what's funny? I want to take a moment. People are saying that I'm trying to portray something. I'm telling my life story. And so when I talk, I'm talking about when things are going on, how things are viewed. And if people want to perceive it in a way that they want to perceive it, that's on them. People say, oh, Dubs acts like he's this and acts like something he's not. Off camera and on camera, this is who I am, man. I'm respectful, I'm mindful, I'm thoughtful, and I ain't bullshitting, right? So anyways, we're there and we can't hit the yard because we got to get cleared by classification committee, right? So my Sally and I made it a point. The state clothes that we were issued, we made sure we didn't cut the bottoms, Bonnaroo them. We didn't Bonnaroo our shirts, meaning we didn't hook them up with baby cuffs, none of that. No, instead, we wanted to look as harmless as we possibly could. There were other dudes that were on the bus with us that they did Bonnaroo their clothes. They could put the baby cuffs, they creased them down, drawing a lot of attention to themselves because that's how somebody who's really with it is going to present themselves on a regular yard. This is not a regular yard. This is a yard that we're flipping. In the words of one of the legends that we spoke to on a layover in Kern Valley, or no, it was Kern back then. He said, nobody knows what you guys are going into, but you vatos are the spearhead. So go over there and see what it is. That legend is no longer alive. Something happened to him in the feds. Those of you that know, just by me saying that, know. Okay. And so my Sally and I were trying to play dumb. But the dudes that were already on that yard, they weren't dumb. They knew who was a threat and who wasn't. The cops in Tehachapi used to have this thing where they would let certain inmates on that yard go through C-files. And they would have our pictures. And they would identify, okay, this one's going to be trouble. This one's not, this and this and that. So we go to committee. We're sitting in the chow hall on the tables waiting to get called for committee. And, they're calling certain dudes. The 2 dudes that were targets that were on the bus with us that came down from the bay. They went to committee and they got cleared for the yard and went back. And we're waiting and waiting. They called my celly. Next thing you know, he comes out of committee in handcuffs and gets escorted right into Ad Seg, which was 7 block was orientation, 8 block was Ad Seg. The chow hall was in between 7 and 8. They both connect, right? So they take him. For me, I'm like, damn. Either I'm going to do this highly on my own or I'm going to convince one of these dudes that's my age who these cats want to get visits and shit. Like, nah, Holmes, that's not where it's at, right? Anyway, so they take my celly. They call a few more people and then they call me in there. Everything in committee sounded good. Hey, we're going to put you in graphic arts or silk screening. They had one of those 2. I think it was silk screening. We're going to put you in this. We're going to put you up for this and education and this and that. And then next thing you know, get him against the wall. The sergeant starts yelling. It was all a play. They snatched me up. They said I had an enemy there, right? They sent me to Ad Seg, sound me up with my celly. We go to committee. My celly goes in, boom. This is not when we're in Ad Seg, some time went by, we go to committee. My celly goes first, bam, he comes out. I go to committee, I come out. And I've said this before, and there were haters in the comment section. Obviously, they don't know anything about what they're talking about. They had 2 yard groups in Ad Seg and Tehachapi in 1997. They had the reintegrated mixed yard. That was the junk yard, right? And then they had the control compatible yard. At the time, only Southerners were on the control compatible yard. Later in 1998, there was an incident that happened with the skinheads on 4A. And they brought them to the back with us. And then they put them on the control compatible yard. Up until that time, it was only Southerners. So again, this is 1997. And the day after committee, they run yard, right? They come to my cell. My celly strips out, bam. And they cuff him. And then I go to the cell. And the cop's like, nah, you're not on this yard group. It's just your celly. And I was like, the fuck? Like, we're cellies. How are we not on the same yard group? Some prisons, some Ad Segs do that. But that place didn't do that, right? So we're like, what the fuck? So they run yard. When my celly comes back and they go to run the next yard, which was a reintegrated mixed yard, they come to the cell. And they tell me to cuff up for yard. Let's do this. And I'm looking at my celly like, what the fuck? And he's like, and this is that game that the CDC plays. I get escorted out. And one of the cops was telling the other cop in the tower, like, hey, this dude is not supposed to be going out to either one of, because there's, in Tehachapi, I'd say there was 2 Ad Seg yards, right? Kind of like Corcoran shoe. And the cop was telling him, like, hey, man, this dude shouldn't be going out there. And he's like, hey, they assigned him. So I remember looking in one of the yards, they had people on it. The other yard was empty. And the first dude, when that yard door would have opened, the first dude right there is somebody that I knew from New Folsom. And I was thinking, they open this door right now, I'm going to kick this dude right in his fucking mouth, and whatever is going to happen is going to happen, right? Because during this time, it was hard for us to get weaponry in the Ad Seg. Because the dudes on the main line were trash. With the exception of the dudes that were coming down on these new buses, right? And so they damn sure weren't sending weaponry to us in Ad Seg. And so it was a slow process. We had just got there. So anyways, they say they're going to open the yard that there's nobody in, right? And I'm trying to tell the tower cop, like, nah, I'm supposed to go to this yard, I think. And because I already seen a target that I wanted. And anyways, he's like, nah, you got the other yard. So bam, they opened the empty yard. So immediately when I went out there, I went to the very back of the yard so I could see who's coming, right? The first dudes they let on the yard, it was two black dudes. I had never been on an ad seg yard with the blacks. But because of that prison, what was going on there, there was no reason for me to get into it with them. No reason for them to get into it with me. So as soon as they came out, I said, hey, Holmes, what Mexicans are assigned to this yard? They knew immediately it's going down. And so they gave me two names. The door opens again, more blacks. It's like, stacking the yard on me. These cops this is how treacherous they were. And then eventually, the two Mexicans that were named. And they were the only two. Luckily for me, there were the only two assigned to that yard. And they come out. And I recognize one of them. I've told the stories, and recently I just told the story again about the only two dudes that I remember in my entire prison term that were Mexican from Southern California that used the N-word. One of them was on the yard with me. Big ass dude. And when I see him, his celly is another big, his celly, they called him Oso. Big ass dude. So I'm looking like, son of a bitch. And so the one that I knew, I called him by his name. And they both were looking at me like they knew I was an enemy to them. But when I called the one I knew, he was like, oh, what's up, man? And I told him, I need to holler at you. So we talked. And I said in the video about him, he was hit because he was using the N-word. That was a fact. The reason that was stated on why he got hit was that he didn't pay a drug debt. But he did. So I told him, hey, check this out. I'm going to holler at you. He said, what's up? And I said, hey, why you lay down? And we had a discussion. And I told him, look, I know what really happened with you, eh? But you laid down. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm trying to pick my best moment because I know these two big ass dudes, I can't beat them both, right? And he tells me, you're not supposed to be on this yard right now, are you? I said, nah, hell no, you know what's up. And he said, look, me and my celly have a pact that if any of you dudes get out here, we're fucking you dudes off. And I said, well, then we're going to find out today. And I remember the hair clippers were near me and I was thinking, can I get to these hair clippers in time to at least bust one of them in the face with it? And instead, this dude told me, he said, you know what, man? You were always all right, eh? He goes, and the fact that you just said, like, you really know what happened with me? He goes, let me call my Sally over here. So I'm thinking, all right, it's going down. He called his Sally over. Long story short, he told his Sally, go to the corner of the yard and stay out of this. When the Sally hit the corner, next thing you know, it was close to, I think they yelled yard recall. Bam, I got off. That dude got put in the hat for saying the N-word, but got played and it got solidified because supposedly he burned somebody, but he never did. And so, like I said, I got off on him. We did our thing. So that was Tehachapi's administration playing games, right? They were trying to validate my celly and yet put me on the reintegrated mixture. So I got off. I remember going to committee after that because now they have to reassign me to the correct yard group. So I remember going to committee. They were pissed. The Judas were mad. The committee was mad. And I remember telling them, because they put me up for transfer from 4A to 4B, the other yard. And I said, hey, fuck all this. I said, you're telling me that I got enemies all over fucking Tehachapi. I said, why don't you just send me back to New Folsom, where I was before I caught my last shoe? And I remember the warden looking at me, and he kind of smirked, and he was like, let me tell you something. He said, you don't run your program. I run your program. And I laughed at that. I said, is that right? He said, yeah. I said, okay. I go back to my cell. Bam. We go to yard, and I'm there waiting a little while. And this time I made it a point to make sure I had a weapon, right? And I remember the day it happened. The cop shows up to my door, and he's like, hey, come on, let's go. You're going to 4B. I said, okay. I start to strip out. He's like, nah, we don't have time for that. We're already late. Let's just go. So I cuff at the door at the handcuff port. He lets me out. I go downstairs, and there's a dude that they're gonna escort with me. And he was an ex-NLR dude, right? Big mouth on the tier, cell soldier. So when I saw it was him, they had me in the rotunda. Right at I'm cuffed up, and I'm able to look out the door and see, okay, who's coming with me? Is he worth it or not? And when I saw that they were at that dude's door, I slid out the handcuff. I held my hands behind me like if I was still cuffed. There was no cop on the floor with me. The cop had went inside. The cop in the tower was smart. He looked down at me. He looked up, and he told that cop, hey, escort this dude by himself. Shit. Now I got to force my hand back in this handcuff. I do that. I go to R&R. They uncuff me. And I'm scanning. There's dudes in there getting packages. There's a holding cell full of dudes from 4A. And I'm looking in there. And I'm trying to find, is there any face that I recognize? And I turn around, and there's a high value target. If I said his name, there's a lot of people that would know exactly who he is. Anyways, he was getting his package, and I remember the cop walked up to me, and he said, hey, step over to the side. I need to strip you out. And I said, well, hold on. I need to talk to this CO about my medication. And he was like, medication? What medication? I already had the razor in my hand, but I was cupping it. And I remember the target was getting a jar of Folgers out of the box, and he was putting it into his laundry bag that he was going to carry his stuff in. And he turned around and he looked at me, and he had a smile, like if I was his friend or his homie. And I immediately grabbed him. I tried to grab him by his throat and shoved the tip of the razor inside of his eyeball. And I missed, and I cut him across his face. And we got to tussling. And every single damn cop that responded to that incident stood on one of my body parts. Like, it was a hand, my forearm, my back, it was nuts. I couldn't believe how many people could stack up on one person. That was the administration once again setting me up. They were just going to slam me down once I hit 4B. So I remember going back to committee, and committee was saying whatever they were saying. Now I got a shoot term. I'm going to be going back to Pelican Bay, right? And I remember before I left, I told the warden, hey, you don't run my program. I do. And I got up and left. I'm not telling this story for any glamour or glory. You guys know that's not my thing. I'm telling this story to show the treachery of the CDC, convicts, as well as cops and the administration. I told you the first dude that I got into it with, that dude didn't deserve to be in the hat. I knew it, and a lot of us knew it. But still, I put my hands on him. The second dude was a real life piece of crap, wanted by a whole lot of people, deservedly so. And I treated him the same way as I treated the first dude, except the first dude was lucky at the time I didn't have a weapon. The CDC is a cold, cold place. There's, with all this talk that's going around and half-truths, whole lies, it kind of makes me want to give more examples. But I'm not here to make anybody look bad. That way of living is bad enough, man. That's my video for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Everybody, please be safe, be smart, and tell the ones you love that you love them. I'm out of here.